Well, the red is back, and we've got some new bling, but that is not why we are here, and that is not why we're excited. We're excited because here it is, folks. Finally, at long last, the 5th and final installment of my world building series, Culture. Hi everyone, and welcome back. If you are new to my channel, my name is Joanna Holden, and I am a fantasy author as well as an author tuber. My channel largely focuses on the intricacies of writing fantasy and building series, and obviously world building. But also I talk about just the struggles of a writer's life, inspiration for a writer's life, and then I'm chronicling the journeys of my own self-publication journey from first draft to publication and releases. I have several fantasy books that will be coming out next year, so if you want information on any of that, if any of it sounds interesting, then please hit the subscribe button, and if you want to know as soon as a new video pops up, ring the little bell, and trust me, there are going to be a lot of fantasy and series videos coming up, especially in the next 2 months here, as I have some amazing new discoveries, or not really new discoveries, but new ways of looking at things that I want to share with you guys. Okay, so enough jabbering, let's talk about world building cultures. First of all, if you have not watched the other 4 videos in the series, I'm going to link them up above in the card so you can go and watch the official playlist. I did try to make these videos in some kind of like a progressive order where it starts off with the more simple, basic type world building elements and then building up to, of course, now the most complicated of all of the world building elements. But honestly, it really does not make any difference what order you watch these in. So if you want to watch this one first and then go watch them, that's fine too, but the playlist is up there if you want it. Secondly, there is a corresponding workbook coming. It is coming, I promise you, and it has way more information than I am able to go into in detail in these videos. These videos are, I learn easiest by watching videos where I can see the person who's trying to teach me, and I can hear them and listen to what they're saying, because it's just easier for me to grasp all of it when I see that, and it makes a more personal connection for me. But there is a workbook coming that includes ideas and lists and descriptions and definitions and all of that fun stuff and questions that help you really get thinking about your world. I do not know, however, exactly when that workbook is going to be coming out, so if you want to get it as soon as it comes out, you can do one of 2 things, or both. The first is make sure that you are following me on Instagram. I have all my social media links in the description box below, but I will be posting to Instagram as soon as it is live on my site. It is a free downloadable workbook. Or you can sign up for my newsletter. That is available on my website, also linked down below. And the newsletter, basically, it's going to ship you the free workbook in the email format as soon as it comes out. So do one of or both of those things, and on that note, I'm also going to mention that because culture is so detailed and there are so many areas you can cover in culture when you're dealing with nations and people groups, I will not be able to go into great detail about any of the categories listed. I will basically be giving you the categories and then some questions and ideas and lists and things. Again, if you want it all, just be ready when the workbook comes out. I feel like I'm shouting. I tend to do that at the beginning of videos because I'm like all psyched up and ready to go, like, you know, do stuff. I will probably slow down and get quieter significantly as the video goes. So, okay, enough talking, Joanna. Let's do this. All right, let's do this. Okay, so the very first thing you're going to want to do in building your cultures is to refer to all of the work that you have already done in the other steps. This is your geography, which is like your maps and all those things, your races and creatures that you have developed, your magic system that you developed, and of course your history that you have developed. Refer back to all of that work as you launch into this section of the workbook of your world building. All of that information is now basically going to be funneled down to create unique and interesting societies and to create variety within those societies. Now, a big question that's going to come up is, do I have to do this for every single nation and people group in my world? Because if you're anything like me, and this tends to happen only with people who have, like, they're creating full worlds, as in high fantasy, or, you know, where you've got a complete world that's got loads of nations. And the simple answer is yes. You do need to do some element of world building for every nation, even if it's only to give them the very basic bare minimum, so that you as the author know a little bit about them, even if all they are is referenced in the book. Now, I am going to give you a little bit of a hack here that you can use to decide how detailed you need to go with each nation as you work with them individually, so that you can take some of that pressure off yourself. Because honestly, if you did every single step for every single nation, even ones that aren't really done anything but mentioned in the book, and then like you have 50 plus nations, it's going to take you years to go through this. So there are a couple of things that you can skip over for some of your nations, and I'm going to tell you which ones now. I'm going to give you an example because I also work very strongly with examples. Let's say you have 4 main nations in your story. Well, I'll call them the Green Nation, the Blue Nation, the Yellow Nation, and the Purple Nation. The Green Nation is where your main character, your MC, your protagonist, is where they come from, and it's where the story starts. Now, since this is where they have been born and raised, their character and their personality and everything about them, their worldview, their value system, is going to be affected by this place. So you are going to want to go into brain-bleedingly detailed work with this nation because it's going to directly affect your main character. Move over to the Blue Nation. The Blue Nation is where the main character, MC, protagonist, runs away when they are, then there's an attempt made on their life. So they go to the Blue Nation. You spend a lot of time in this Blue Nation while you are in the story, and it takes up a large portion of the novel. So you are going to want to do a great deal of detail for this nation as well, every single step for this nation, because you're going to be there for a while. Bring us to the Yellow Nation. The Yellow Nation is important to the story, but we never actually get to see it. We see people from this nation. It is represented through, let's say, a group of politicians who are part of the World Council or something that meet in the Green Nation. So you are going to want to do quite a lot of the steps. Maybe not all of them. Maybe a few can be missed, but for the most part, because they are represented by people and because they're going to be talked about a lot, and maybe the love interest comes from this country, you're still going to want to do most, if not all, for this nation. Now I go on to the Purple Nation. They are only ever mentioned in the book. We talk a little bit about what they're like, some of these stereotypes that the characters are expecting when we meet them, maybe never meet them at all, but they never actually come into the story. They never actually affect the plot other than just being there. So you're not going to need to do really that much world building for them except for the basics. And then really you can skim over everything else because they never actually show up. They're never represented by characters. They're just there. Now, in the workbook, it will be very easy because I will be putting an asterisk. I hate saying that word. It's so complicated, but an asterisk next to the ones that are fundamental basics that every single place that you come up with is going to need to have. And then obviously it will be blank beside the ones that are up to you as the author to decide whether or not a nation actually is important enough in the story, in the world, to need these details. But basically what it comes down to is if the story is set in this place, you have to do everything. If there are characters represented from this nation, you need to do at least most. And then if the nation is only mentioned, just do the basics. I hope that helps. I hope that takes some of the stress off of you. Again, it's up to you as the author. If you have an entire continent that you will never actually make it to in your book, but you want to detail them a little bit because they are part of ancient history, ancient world history, then feel free to not do any of this because you're not actually going to see them, mention them, hear about them, anything in this book. They're just there because you need them to complete the world. But again, it's up to you as the author to decide how detailed you want to go. Just don't be afraid to go through all of these steps when it comes to an important nation because honestly, it's a lot of fun. Don't be intimidated by it. Okay, so let's start actually building a culture. So let us say that for this part of the video, really the rest of the video, we're going to be focusing on a single individual nation. Now, before you even get into deciding what the basics are, you need to know what kind of nation you're dealing with. Are you dealing with a single individual nation all by itself? Are you dealing with a small grouping of nations that have kind of allied themselves into under one government? Are you dealing with an empire or a colony where there is a hub nation, a lead nation, and then a whole bunch of other nations that kind of have their own thing going on, but they all are held accountable by the big nation at the top? Then you can decide if you need to do these steps for each individual colony, each individual sub-nation, or if this just kind of covers all of them. So, this is where you pull out your maps. So go all the way back to step 1, pull out the maps that you made, the geography, the topography, all that crap, and you're going to look at where your nation is geographically located. Then you're going to make a list of the following items near your map, as a part of your map, something to do with the map, but have your map nearby so you can refer to it when deciding these things. You're also going to want the map that has listed all of your fantasy races and creatures so that you know what kinds of races and creatures you're going to be dealing with, and you can add them to the list. Now you take all of those things and you're going to, again, funnel it down into the following items. Make a list under each question. What races and ethnicities live here? Make a list. What magical or unordinary or out of our world creatures live here? Sentient, non-sentient, either way. What are your population numbers for the entire nation? If it is an empire, you can talk about the hub nation and then the sub-nations. If it's like a grouping of nations under central government, you can do individual nations and then as a whole. But you are going to need to know as a whole, what are your population numbers? Special pro tip here, if you do not know how many people could be in a nation, look in our world, find a country that's about the same size, and then just look up how many people live there. And then that can kind of give you an estimate. You can go fewer, you can go more if you want to overpopulate it, whatever. Just look at our world, find a country that's the same size, same geographical location, whatever, and then see how many people live there. What language or languages are spoken in this nation? And this will depend a lot on isolation versus immigration. In other words, if your country doesn't have a whole lot of people living in it from other countries, then they're going to probably speak pretty much one language, whereas if they maybe were recently joined as a nation or were joined at any point as a nation and you have like separated societies, there may be multiple languages or dialects spoken. If you have a heavy immigration flow, there will be a lot of different languages spoken. But make sure you identify your common language, and don't just call it the common language, please. Think of a name for it. But you have a commonly spoken language, like the nation's official language, and then you may have some sub-languages and dialects that are spoken either among immigrants who now are citizens and they have developed their own subcultures, or even, again, maybe parts of the nation that are more isolated and haven't seen as much traffic, or if there was once a break-in society and now they have been joined. Sorry, I just bumped my camera. Think of England and Scotland. They have, Gaelic and then English, but there are still people who speak Gaelic. So just to be thinking in those terms. What level of advancement is this society at? Think in terms of technology, medicine, education, things of that nature. And don't forget sanitation. What is the physical layout and atmosphere of the country? And I'm going to be looking down because I'm going to be reading some things you need to think about for physical layout and atmosphere. The climate, general weather, and seasons. And remember that if you have an equator, think north of the equator and south of the equator. Don't forget that. How harsh or pleasant is the environment? This is going to seriously affect a lot of things. How domesticated is the wildlife? Is this an area where, you're fighting for survival every day from evil monsters? Or is it pretty tame and like a lot of our modern first world countries where, there's wildlife, but, as long as you don't go out into the mountains where there's nobody there, you're okay. And then lastly, what are the natural resources? And think plentiful versus scarce. So every nation has its own specialty, if you will, natural resources. Most nations have some degree of water and certain kinds of food that are grown there. But also be thinking things like what kinds of metals do they have, what do they make their clothes from, and then this is going to seriously affect the next two questions, which are, what is this nation's level of self-sustainability? What can they provide for themselves? What can they not? Note that if they are completely isolated and separated from all other nations and have no interaction, it needs to be believable. That country needs to be located in a spot that has enough water, food, and basic resources that they can live fine without anybody's help. And you need to, maybe if you're doing that, think creatively. Make the people think creatively. If there is a resource that is scarce, how can they come up with something to compensate for it? Don't just gloss it over as, they're isolated because they have all of the things that they need. Get creative. Make them come up with things to compensate and to keep their society advancing. This is a great way to build a more unique culture. Just a side tip there as well. And then, of course, in contrast to that, what is their level of contribution to other societies, to other nations around them? Think import and export. What do they need from other people? What do they give to other people in return? And depending on your nation's level of good communications with other nations, this may be a little bit touchy. And it can lead to some interesting International politics. You can have a country that desperately needs a certain, like, there's a country maybe above them that has control of water, or, you know, think about oil in our world and gas and things. There's a country that has kind of a hold on those, so all the other countries have to kind of be nice to them because they're worried that maybe the water won't be allowed to flow through or the food will not be allowed to be brought in, and so they have to get creative. Again, make your countries be creative. Don't just give them their resources and have all the international relations be fine. Have there be very definitive consequences to losing a relationship with another nation. So make it either an inconvenience, something as simple as like they don't have sugar or honey, so nothing is sweet in their land anymore, or something as dire as they're going to cut the water source off, or they're going to cut off our power supply, or something of that nature. Make their relationships with others be relatively interdependent so that their politics are going to end up being complicated. This is what makes it unique, realistic, and honestly just so interesting to read about. Next, think about the feel of the people. Now, when I say the feel of the people, what I mean is the intangibles of their nation, their worldview, their general value system, and if they have a sense of ethics or a specific moral code by which they live. Now, I don't mean like, a Knights of the Order kind of moral code. I mean, in general, do they view murder as not okay and have a law to have a consequence for it? Do they view thievery as bad? Do they view lying as bad? That kind of a moral code. As far as worldview, how do they view the world? It's kind of an obvious, but just think about it. Now, these are generalizations. Big important point here. Not all of your people in this nation are going to agree to all of these things. But in general, what is their worldview? What do they value the most? What do they value the least? And then out of that, we're going to come into what is next most important, which is how do other nations feel about them? And what are they most commonly known for among other nations? Now, this is important because every nation has a stereotype. We think of Americans as being independent. We think of Brits, the English as being very sophisticated and elegant. We can think of the French as being very romantic. And these are just like European and Western world thoughts. There are so many different countries where we have a stereotype. And this is going to play into your culture. It's part of what makes them unique and different. So think about what this nation's stereotype would be. What do the other nations think? What are they known for? Are they known for being legalistic? Are they known for having a law for everything? Are they known for being super loose morally and like, oh yeah, those people, they just, everything goes with them? Is it kind of that kind of a deal? What do the other nations think? And realize that each nation will have a different view of them based on their history, but pretty much all the nations are going to have a general stereotype. That's why stereotypes exist. So go ahead and pinpoint a stereotype. It can be a single adjective, like these people are known as being brave, intellectual, passionate, or it can even be a full sentence or a full paragraph. Like these people are nomadic, they are known for their fighting spirit, but they are also known for being incredibly generous. Something like that. And if you want to go even deeper, you can develop a stereotype and then develop how they really are. If you want to have a nation that is maybe misunderstood by the other nations and they come across as a certain way, but they're not really like that underneath, then you can feel free to create both a stereotype and then a true-to-life generalization. As always, remember that you are going to have individuals and even full groups of people who are not only the exception to the rule, maybe they are the extreme opposite of the rule. Don't be afraid to throw those in there, and again, make sure that you're not trying to make every single citizen of your nation fit into this mold. There should be a fair amount of diversity, and depending on the next segment of categories, there may be more people, more variety among the people, or there may be less allowed variety among the people. Okay, and now we get to the categories. Please do not freak out, but there are 20 categories that are listed here. Now, again, I am limited in time as to how much detail I can go into for each of these, so there will be a lot more detail in the actual official workbook, along with lists of ideas and potential resources, online resources, etc., for you to do your own research. So this is the part that probably is going to be the most excruciating and time-consuming. I know I said history would be, but when I looked at this, I was like, no, I think this is probably going to take the most time, because you do have to do this for more than one nation. But again, don't be intimidated by it. Don't be afraid of it. It is so much fun to come up with this. And hopefully I will be giving you some ideas for something different outside of the stereotypical classic fantasy types that each of these categories can fall into, and even contemporary fantasy as well. Also important, and I didn't think to mention this before, but if you were writing something that is not high fantasy, let's say you're writing contemporary fantasy or urban fantasy, you're still going to want to look at these categories for any fantasy races who are like their own people groups within that story. So if you've got a story that takes place in, let's say you're doing it in Florida, and they're all in Miami Beach, and you have a group of fairy gangsters. That sounds weird, but no, probably that story has been done. But you're still going to want to use these categories to define and make that fairy gangster group unique and different. So no matter what subgenre of fantasy you're dealing with, whether you are dealing with actual land nations or just like divisions of people groups within another nation or spread around the world, you still want to do this. Okay, I'm going to read through the list and then go back and talk about each individual aspect and category so that you can get the overall picture and then the details. So first, of course, you have government structure. Second is religion. Third is military and local security. Fourth is magic. Fifth is family systems, structures, and expectations. Sixth, class divisions and living situations. Seventh, trade and occupations. Eighth, monetary systems. Ninth, immigration, international travel, and view of / interaction with other nations. 10, education. 11, the arts. 12, holidays, celebrations, and ceremonies. 13, dress. 14, culinary. 15, current political / religious / social issues / hot topics. 16th, celebrities. 17th, news and how it is circulated. 18th, insignias, crests, flags, and colors. 19th, laws and lawmaking. And 20th, organizations or orders that are important to the country or to the story. First on the list, government structures. So it is very common and very typical for us high fantasy writers to fall back on the good old monarchy system, or to even try and modernize it a little bit with something like a democracy or a republic, but there is actually a plethora of governmental systems out there that you can choose from. And I'm going to have in the workbook a list of a variety of kinds of government structures, and be aware that you can mix and match, because a lot of the types of governments are reliant on worldview or on a moral system, but they also include multiple sources of power. So while there are some that are very definitive, like a monarchy obviously has a king or a queen and a royal line, it might also at the same time be a meritocracy where it is ruled by a king who is completely in charge of everything, but the king is selected every 50 years or so by a series of trials so that the person can prove themselves. So in that case, it is a monarchy / meritocracy, or rather a meritocracy / monarchy. Or you can have a military dictatorship that is secretly ruled by the medical community, and they're using the military to cover up and to keep people from knowing that they're the ones who are actually in charge. So sometimes it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, we have a democracy. Sometimes it is very convoluted and complex, and you actually have multiple parties working. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of ones that are less well known, and I will leave the rest of them for you in the workbook. Colonialism. I think we all know what colonialism is, and we kind of have a basic idea of how it works, but colonies were very, very common. And colonialism is not as simple as, oh, well, we have all these nations. No, you have your hub nation, and your hub nation could be dictated by, let's see, a plutocracy, which is ruled by wealth. So if you're wealthy, you rule the nation. It could be ruled by socialism. It could be ruled by a theocracy, which is religion-based. See how you don't just have one kind of government necessarily. Sometimes it can be very convoluted and very complex. So go through the list that I provided in the Worldbuilding workbook and choose one or more that combined or by themselves work for your nation. Second, we have religion. Now, religion is something that oftentimes in fantasy is sort of simplified. there is a god or a goddess or something that the entire nation worships. They have a state religion. And while this is definitely true to history, I mean, you look back in history and almost every government has had their official religion that they're okay with, and a lot of times they were not very nice to people who didn't follow that religion. In a modern world day setting, you have a plethora of religions, and there are many, many countries, in fact, I would dare to say most countries, where there are lots of them accepted in the nation, and it's not so much like, oh, well, we are the nation of whatever, and we only have this one religion that we follow. They actually serve, they allow their citizens to worship like whoever, or at least they have a list of okay religions. If you do choose to have a state religion or a national religion, then feel free to have your subgroups that worship something else in secrecy, or choose they only worship as like paying their dues to the government and keeping themselves out of trouble, but really they don't believe in a god, or they don't believe in the religion that they're talking about. That can serve as amazing plot conflict. It can also serve great for character journeys, and it can make for a very unique society. But again, in our current modern day world, particularly the Western world, there's not as many nations that have a state religion. So, don't feel like you have to have a religion for each nation or for each people group. Like, the dwarves worship these gods, and the elves worship these gods, and the fairies worship the stars, and the mortals worship each other. You don't have to have each people group, race, only, follow one religion. Feel free to create a variety, and even within each religion, you can create a variety of versions. So, for instance, let's say you have a society of werewolves who worship the moon, right? Well, maybe a small party of them actually believe that the moon is a deity, it is a goddess, and we see a representation in the sky, whereas other groups believe the moon is only a symbol of peace and purity and whatever, and that's what they actually worship. They don't believe that there actually is a god or a goddess. And then you have a group that they believe it is all complete craziness, and they just think that there is nothing to worship at all. And so, in essence, they worship nothing. Also remember that there are many different kinds of religions. There are religions where you worship one god, or one figure of some kind. There are religions where you worship multiple gods, or demigods, or whatever. Think of the ancients. You also have groups of people that are into spiritism. They worship spirits, and they believe that the deity is in all of us and all that kind of thing. You have people who worship ideas. They don't believe that there is a central God. They are very into ideas. Things like freedom, love, peace, all those kinds of things. Not everyone worships something, so make sure you throw some atheists in there too. And don't forget, because this is fantasy, that magic will likely affect your religions. This is especially true if your magic system is hardcore. If it affects everything around you, the characters, the plot, everything, your magic is going to affect your religion. So make sure to include that when you are thinking your religions through. Thirdly, we have your military and your security. You're going to want to think about how big a part your military plays in your government, how they are structured, what kind of military force you're going to be using, and of course, then what your local security is going to look like, your police force, your sheriff's department, all that stuff. How does that work out? Is the government responsible for providing a police force for every city? Is it the responsibility of whoever the wealthiest person in town is to provide security? Is it basically everybody for yourselves, and if you want somebody, you got to come up with the money yourselves? This will play partially into your taxation, which will come later in monetary systems, but think through very carefully, because it's not enough just to say, oh, we have a military. Well, think through, what kind of a military do you have? What kind of fighting style do they have? What kind of weapons are accessible to them? What kind of weapons are strictly military and are kept from the public? Does your military use magic? If so, how do people get into the military? Even if they don't use magic, how do people get into the military? Is there a drafting system, or is that only in time of war? What do the general populace think about the military? What do the general populace think about their police force or their security forces? How do people hire private security, and is that common, or is that not legal? Are weapons legal in your country? Is magical weapons legal in your country? That was bad grammar. Are magical weapons legal in your country? Be thinking those things through, because your military is going to be a key force of your nation, obviously. If your nation can't defend themselves, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And maybe that's part of your plot conflict. Maybe that's part of your government's conflict. Maybe that's part of the external stuff that's going on, is your nation is insufficient in protecting themselves, so they have to play bootlicker to all the other nations. You, again, use this as an opportunity, not just to make your nation the most powerful nation that there is, and their military is awesome and amazing. No, step back a second and think, okay, so I have a nation that's all powerful like that. This nation is nowhere near all powerful like that. How do they compensate for it? How do they make up for that? How do they make sure that they are secure to some degree? And if they're not secure to some degree, how do they compensate for it? And what are they doing to ensure that their military is more successful? Are they working on ways to build their military through magic, even though magic in general is completely illegal in every other country? Are they trying to revive it? Are they trying to get rid of the magic in their military because it is proving to be too chaotic, or the government is threatened by a new leader who's rising in the military? Use the military and the local police and magic and weapons, and just get into the dirty details of that and figure out the structure and all of the details, so that you can use it not just as a backdrop aesthetic for some war that's coming down the line, but that you really, really know through. And again, in contemporary and urban fantasies where your backdrop is, your own backyard, do not be afraid to get detailed about these fantasy races and their militaries, their secret militaries, their secret police. You can also include in this section, and I think that this will probably come in more later, but now that I think about it, I think it's probably more applicable here, the espionage. Do you have spies in your military? Are they military spies? Or is the military required by law to be separate from the spies because of the moral codes? Just be thinking through things of that nature as well. Fourth, magic. Now, you already did 90% of the work for this back when you created your magic system and when you created your history for magic. You basically figured out, and I'll kind of review here, where your magic come from, who can use it, how, why, all of that stuff, and then what the views of magic are. So you're going to take that and you're going to use it in each nation individually. How do they view magic? How does it affect their society? And so on and so forth. So again, all the work that you already did on magic, that should take care of 90%. Just use the remaining 10% to write it down specific to each nation, and make sure that each nation, at minimum, has a little bit of difference from each other. Maybe, I don't do numbers, but maybe make sure that everybody has like a slightly different view of magic, or a different use, or has different levels of magic users, just to make it interesting and realistic. Fifth, you have family structures. Family systems, structures, and expectations. This one is kind of easy to gloss over because we automatically think, oh, well, a family, father, mother, kids, extended family, uncles, aunts, and cousins. And yeah, well, think through this, because it might be a little bit more interesting if you vary things up a little bit. Because you're not talking just about your family systems or your structure where you have the father, the mother, and the kids. Maybe think through the expectations level. In this culture, in general, is it the father who has more power in the family dynamics, the mother who has more power in the family dynamics? Is it usually considered that they have equal power in the dynamics? Do the children have greater power over their parents in general after years of changing up parenting methods? What are the expectations of marriage? How do people do marriage? They do arranged marriages for power or for money or for magic? Do they do falling in love and then you just date whoever you want and then you just marry whoever you want? Is marriage even a thing? Do people do marriage? Or is it a, sex for whatever kind of a society that they don't really do commitments? They view that as, in general, a bad thing. And maybe you have a couple people who like to stay committed for life, but they don't really do the actual commitment thing. Think these things through. Think about children, having kids. How many kids are you allowed to have, or is there a number that you are required? In general, do people have like their boy and their girl and they're happy? Or do they, as a society, for survival reasons or for whatever, maybe purity reasons, they like to have as many kids as possible? What are the views about women or, families who can't have kids? Is their knowledge of science enough that they understand that it's not all the woman's fault? Or is it a huge deal of shame for the woman when she can't have kids? What is the adoption situation like? What do we do with orphans and with families who can't take care of their children? Is there any kind of like a social services kind of system that is trying to help with the dilemma of having families that can't take care of their kids, or having orphans, or any number of things? And then how does that affect society in general? Is the family valued highly? Is it a 1950s thing where like the family is everything? Or is it more of what we see in the modern day world where the family is viewed as dysfunctional and almost hilarious because there's so many people who just don't believe that families can work anymore? Do you have family where it's more than just the parents and the kids? Is family including everybody? Do you include all the in-laws and the cousins and the uncles and aunts? Is everybody viewed as your family, and everybody kind of lives in community with each other and see each other on a regular basis and have input into their lives pretty regularly and in a very non-offensive manner? Or is it incredibly isolated where it's you and your partner and your kids and that's it, and you don't take advice from anybody else, and it's very, very looked down upon to include large families? Is there a huge amount of variety and it's like a free-for-all? Be aware that most societies will have some element of structure and expectation, and while it varies from nation to nation, there are some value systems, and this goes back to the very first thing we talked about, which was the worldview, the value systems, the moral codes. In general, your country is going to have some semblance of expectation on family, and even if that is that we don't do families, like we just don't believe in that, then that's still technically a general belief, and it's still important to make note of. So that is family system structures and expectations. Next, you have class divisions and living situations. Now, you can go as extreme or as balanced as you want with this. You can have, only a feudal system where only a certain amount of people even have any level of wealth or decent living situations, and like everybody else lives in squalor. Or you can have an extremely balanced where there's the government and then everybody else is required to live on exactly the same living situation, exact same amount of money every day. You can have a varied situation where you have high class, middle class, lower class, and then just play with what different dynamics that you want to work with. Then take into consideration how that affects society, how that affects general morale, how that affects prejudices between classes, even within classes, and then what kind of living situations do each class generally live in? Again, you're working with generalizations here. Do people live in palaces? Do you have your skyscraper apartment buildings? Do you have, your little rows of houses? Are all the houses in one area of a town or of a district so that they're safer? Do people live in houses, or is this a nomadic society where they live in tents? Does everybody live in a palace? Is it one giant, castle type city where everybody lives in some part of this giant structure? Is it a moving structure, like in Mortal Engines, where it's literally physically moving around, but everybody still has a place on it? And yeah, just think through the living situations dependent upon class, and are there actual physical levels where the lower class lives down here, the higher class lives up here? Is it a more desirable area topographically where it's just nicer, it's lush, it's rich, it's more temperate? And then you have the outlands, the desert areas, the places that nobody wants to live in, the trash dumps. Who lives where, basically. Think through that. 7th, we have trade and occupation. Okay, this is where a lot of fantasy people just, they stick with the medieval trade and occupation. I wanted to make a list of, a variety of trades and occupations that are not, a knight or a farmer, but I did not have time to actually print that out. It will be in the workbook. But think through a variety of trades and occupations from various societies and different times in our past of our world. Again, if you're dealing with, a contemporary or urban fantasy, this isn't going to be as big of a deal. But maybe within your fantasy cultures, you've got some different kinds of trades and occupations that are limited to certain kinds of races or, what have you. But if you are doing a high fantasy or any kind of fantasy where you are building an entire world, do not skip this step. Do not just assume that society just kind of goes on. List the kinds of occupations, and then you can have your characters fall into any of those categories. This will go back to the natural resources, the import-export whole thing. Sift through them and think through, what is the most treasured job, the job that everybody wants, or a list of jobs that everyone wants. Think in our society, lawyer, doctor, politician, high-paying jobs that everybody wants their kid to marry. or to be. Whereas, truck driver, not many people dream about their kid growing up to be a truck driver. Think through those jobs in your magical world. Maybe magic users are considered the highest occupation that you can have, but very few people actually get in because of the incredible strain that it takes on your mind and your emotions. Or maybe it is completely blood related, so that affects things. Maybe, as in our world, there was a time when a government job was like the hottest thing you could get. It was security for life. It was good pay for life. It was an amazing retirement. How about retirement? What's going on with your world about retirement? Do they have jobs where they will take care of you after you're done, or do you just work yourself until you're dead? Are there jobs where you get residual income and the people just set things up in their young days and then they let the money come in? This one is a little bit harder to deal with, but we still have to include it, even though it just makes us all cringe inside. But what is the level of servitude and slavery? What are their views on owning other people and requiring them to do work for them, or on having other people do work for them on a daily basis? Are servants and slaves a part of the family who receive almost equal privilege, as in some of more ancient societies? Or is servitude and slavery a thing of complete and utter just like grossness, where you literally have people transported from other nations and just made to work without receiving any humane treatment, any rights whatsoever? Is servitude and slavery an outcome of wars that go on? Is it an outcome of gambling debts, or maybe getting in trouble with the law in some way? Do you become a slave for a certain amount of time? Is there a way to win your freedom? Is there a way to have someone else purchase your freedom? Again, it's cringeworthy material, but in a lot of countries, in a lot of history, it has happened, and it is a thing that goes on. You also want to think about black market servitude and slavery issues. This one is the most cringeworthy of all to me, because it is still something that is happening in our nation and around the world. But you do need to at least consider it for your nations, because, again, it is so real life. Think about, let's use, for instance, in a case, magic users. If you have a world where magic is completely rare, do people kidnap recognized magic users and then sell them in the black market for the highest bid to try and make a ton of money? Are those people then put into a life of slavery and servitude, forced to use their magic for whoever they are bought by, to create wars or to create peace, to create prosperity, what have you? You can use this for any number of people groups, but very commonly, black market slave trading is a thing where even if it's not looked down, or if it's not looked highly on in society and it's outlawed in society, and we would never do that in society, a lot of times your politicians, your wealthy people, they're still doing unthinkable acts under the scenes, and black market slave trade is definitely a thing of that. So take that in consideration. Note that things like sex trafficking are usually reserved for books that are darker or are more mature. They would not be used in like a YA or middle grade at all. So do be very, very careful if you use these in your books, just as a side note. This step is going to go hand in hand with number 8, which is monetary systems. That is because the amount of money or livestock or whatever is being traded for jobs is going to be directly tied into the kinds of money, the value of the money, and the way that the money is issued. Remember, there was a time in every nation where people literally would just trade chickens and, resources and things. Maybe you have nations that are like that. But if you're going to create a monetary system where you have an actual item or an item that is representative of the item, of a precious metal or something, you need to take some time and really think through that. What kind of objects are being exchanged? Are we talking like gems, gold, silver, any number of things like that? Or are we talking about representations like we have with paper money or with checks? How is the banking done? Where do people keep their money? Just think through those kinds of things and then write down all the ideas you can come up with and then pick which one you like the best. Maybe you have a combination. Maybe only the high class use representation for their money because they have so much money and they spend so much money at one time that then they use representative items like paper or a chip or something like that. Maybe magic is what is being used to transfer money, or kind of similar to what we use in our online transactions, but it's been done through magic. Or maybe magic itself is the highest trade item and people go to great lengths to find it. Use all the stuff that you garnered from your magic, work through, and then come in here and just go crazy with it. Alright, ninth is immigration, international travel, and view of/interaction with other nations. Oh my gosh, so much to unpack in this section. Let's see how much we can get to before we run out of time. So, think through your nations, the international relations in your world. How do these nations view each other? How does this specific nation view other nations? Like, they shouldn't be in perfect relationship with everybody. Every nation has their own intrigue, their own like secret politics going on, their own underhanded deals, or corruption issues or whatever. They've all got an issue. They've all got something going on. And again, going back to the natural resources, everybody has a card that they're trying to hold over other people's heads. Everybody wants to get that ace up their sleeve. So which nation has it, or which nations are pretending and bluffing they have it, and which nations have just given up even trying to pretend, and they're just trying to keep peace with everybody. Think about your international relationships here. Next, be thinking about travel between the nations. How strict is this particular nation with its immigration laws, and about who they let in as opposed to who they don't, and how do the international relations affect that? Within your nation, are there groups of immigrants who have been living here for generations, but they've kind of been sequestered off by themselves because of the general prejudice against them? Or are they pretty much free to do whatever they want, and there are a variety of immigrated societies who intermingle without any problem? They still hold on to their heritage, but they don't have any problems with anybody. Remember that with all creatures, human or not, there's going to be some level of prejudice. There's going to be some element of racism or ethnicity problems. You're going to have all of those not pleasant issues happening. So do not be intimidated by the issues going on in our own world to attack them and to just include them in your story. As frustrating as it is, it's life, it's real, so feel free to include that and to really think through what it means for each individual nation and how the different nations vary from each other. Moving on, we have number 11, which is education. This one is pretty simple, but what are the levels of education that are available to the general populace? Which ones are reserved for wealthy or royal or noble? Is there a government system that provides schooling? Is it up to individual families to just kind of do whatever they think is right? Are there schools? If so, what do they look like? What do they teach? Are they segregated by race, age, gender, what have you? Different schools for the rich and different schools for the poor. What is the level of literacy? How educated in general is the average person, and how high is the literacy rate? What opportunities are there for specialized schools or for specialized training for different types of jobs? Think apprenticing, not just college, but apprenticing. And of course, what level of value is put on education? Is education something that is the highest thing you can achieve? Is it something that is viewed as completely unnecessary because you're just working the farms every day anyway? Okay, the next few are going to go by very quick, so thank goodness. Let's see how quickly we can get through them while still giving them the appropriate attention that they need. 11th is the arts. This refers to, obviously, art, music, dance, poetry, and literature. And yeah, this is a place where you can just go crazy and have all the fun you want. There's not really a whole lot that I can tell you here. The amount of leisure time that your society has is going to directly impact how much time they can spend developing the arts. Also consider architecture under this category, as it is technically a sort of a form of art. Different architectural styles will follow each period, and so yeah, as you have eras throughout history in this nation, the architecture is going to change, so do give note to that as you're writing things down. 12th is holidays, celebrations, and ceremonies. And these are not just making national holidays on your calendar or coming up with random celebrations around certain times of the year, around seasons. Think religion. What does religion say? What happened in history that is worth celebrating as a part of your national celebrations? Also think ceremonies. Things like, how do you celebrate birth? How do you celebrate death? Or not celebrate, but like, how do you mourn? And how do you have like a wake, or do you have a funeral? Do you even acknowledge it, or do you just bury people? Is there a ceremony for a marriage? If so, what does it look like? Is there a certain time, as in the instance of a bar mitzvah, where a boy becomes a man, or maybe you have a girl becomes a woman, or there's a specific age where you become an official adult, and that is celebrated. Think about our 21st birthday thing. That's the big deal where you go out and you get drunk, because now you can officially drink legally. Any number of things like that. What kind of celebrations and what do they look like? And then list your national holidays, religious holidays, local holidays, and then the kinds of celebrations that coincide with those. I did mention religious, right? Sometimes I don't remember things as I'm saying, But yeah, all of that's going to be in this category. 13 is dress. I personally love this one the best because I'm not super duper fashionable. Like, as you can tell, I'm wearing a shirt that is really old. But I love fantasy fashion and developing fashions and developing distinctions in fashion, not just from nation to nation or international fashion trends, but also dealing with things like gender distinction, uniforms for military and local police, uniforms for schools and for different orders of, knights and stuff, and all that kinds of fun stuff. So this is the time where you just go on Pinterest and you just go crazy, whether it be fashion fantasy, maybe you want to model your fashion after a time period in our history, our world history, or again, maybe like if you're doing a contemporary or urban fantasy, there are certain markers that separate the fantasy races from normal humans that a human wouldn't know to recognize, but a fantasy character would. So be sure to include that and take your time and just enjoy it because this is one of the most fun parts. 14th is culinary. Here you think about your common foods, your uncommon foods. These will both go back to import and export and natural resources, things of that nature. And, of course, your culturally traditional foods. Think Southern food, French cuisine, Italian foods, things of that nature. 15th is current political, religious, and social issues and hot topics. I'm just going to stop there and say that politicians are going to make decisions that people are not okay with, or are going to discuss making decisions that people are not okay with, or are very okay with. There are going to be some religious deals that are going on that people disagree on, or doctrinal issues, or whatever that people are not okay with. And then, of course, social issues. There's always changes in society and how society views different people, or different moral codes, or different this, or different that. Look at our world, see things that are currently issues, that were issues in history, and issues that have just been issues forever, and have always plagued mankind. 16th is celebrities. You might not think that this would be important, but think again about your main character's idols. Who do they look at, whether it be a warrior or a fashion model? Who do they look at as their source of inspiration? Who do they want to be like when they grow up? Now, for some main characters, it is a hero of legend, it is a hero of old, but almost everyone has someone in the modern world day setting that they look to as their idol. That aside, every culture has their idols naturally. Whether this be actual idols, like people that are believed to be deities, whether they be deities or not, or just people who are like actors on the stage plays, or designers of great inventions, or designers of great fashion, or maybe singers, or artists, or musicians. A lot of times celebrities are going to be located strictly in the arts. Just sit down and jot up a list maybe of your general celebrities, what it takes to be a celebrity, what being a celebrity means, whether being a celebrity actually means that you live in wealth or you just get a lot of recognition, and then like how the general populace views celebrities. If you have a very hardworking society that doesn't really have time for leisure, they're not going to pay as much attention to celebrities. Or maybe there are people who secretly just, they gush over celebrities all the time and they just wish they could have that lifestyle. Whereas a leisurely culture may just be all about their celebrities, and everybody's gushing about them. And there are people who are secretly like, I just wish that all the celebrities would just go away because this is really annoying. This is going to go right into point 17, which is news and how it is circulated. How do people find out about these celebrities? What kind of news do people find out about? How do they find out about their news? Do you have heralds who go about to different towns and proclaim the news and what's happening in the kingdom to the people? Do you have actual papers? Do you have scrolls? Do you have magic that mimics our digital downloads, like a means of communicating with people magically? And then add to this, like tack on to this, communication. How do people communicate? Is there any kind of are there any inventions that have been made to make communication easier, such as the telegraph, the telephone, the radio? Is it an actual scientific device, or is it a magical device of some kind, or a magical method of some kind? We're almost there, guys. Last 3 items. Okay, insignias, crests, flags, and colors. So your nation is going to have an official flag or the colors, whether that be of the nation or it be of the specific rulers to the nation. So a lot of times in like medieval stories, you'd have flying the king's colors. You have the nation's colors. What does that flag look like? Is it a flag that has a picture on it? Is it just like certain colors, streams that are put up? Is it like a crest, like a family crest that changes out with every ruler? And then consider things like insignia. So, and this is not relegated only to government or to nations. Think military, think family crests and insignias. Think school, think anything that might have an insignia, a crest, a flag, or colors that represent them. 19. Laws and lawmaking. This will be boring as all get out, but you have to do it. So think through the basic laws of your country, and again, you can look at some in our modern world and ancient worlds. And don't forget that while you should be looking at big picture items like government, right and wrong for things like stealing and murder and arsony. Arson, there we go. Arson. But also think through things like finances, inflation. There was once a law in Babylon that if you did their equivalent of forging money, that, and inflating the system, that you would have your head cut off, even if you were a government official. So their economy was pretty stable for a long time because the government was not able to inflate the money on them. Note, I'm not trying to promote any kind of political idealism here. I'm just saying that there are some countries that have had some crazy laws that have actually worked for them. And you also want to think through how harsh are penalties for things. And do you have like a prison system? Do you have a penal code? Do you have a penal system? Or do you have like where people just, they either lose a limb or they die, or they're burned, or they're beaten? Like what goes on in that? And then how public is it? Are executions all completely public like they used to be? Are punishments completely public like they used to be? Does a person carry that shame for the rest of their life? Or is it just kind of like, everybody does it and it just kind of is forgotten? Unless, of course, the death part, that would be hard to come back from. Who makes the laws? Is it your king or your emperor or whoever? Or do they delegate? Are they just kind of over a group of people who make laws? Well, where do those people come from? How is it set up? Is it set up to represent everyone? Is it set to represent only certain groups? Is it set up with a certain prejudice against certain groups? Again, think magic, think your fantasy races, think history. Who makes the laws? How are they made? And what are some of the most common and big picture laws out there? And last but not least, organizations or orders that are important to the country or to the story. So for this, you will think of maybe an organization of agents that are seeking peace around the world. Maybe you have an order of knights, or an order of magic users, or an organization that is determined to stop magic users even though their methods are not necessarily legal. Think rogue organizations, think sanctioned organizations, and think how they might implement international relations, what this might mean for the future of your people's freedom, all kinds of fun things like that. Organizations and orders exist in all societies, and it's up to you to make them interesting, unique, and important to the story. If you look back at these categories, these 20 categories, you're not going to use every single detail in your story, but it is important for you as the author to understand the world, because the world that you have built, each nation, each individual city, each individual family, it's going to impact your main character. Your main character has grown up in this nation. This is what has shaped their view of the world. This is maybe the worldview that they're trying to buck, that they're trying to change, that they're trying to fight. But it has affected your main character hugely. Your main love interest is going to be affected by their nation. Your various sidekicks and heroes and villains, everyone's going to be affected by the cultures that they have grown up in. And their individual backstories are going to shape them a lot. But again, these are going to affect everything, so please do not skip these steps for the big picture nations and even some of the smaller nations that are still represented through characters to some degree. Alright! We made it through, I can't believe it! Okay, so that, ladies and gentlemen, is step 5 of my world building series, Culture, developing people groups and nations. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot out of it. As I mentioned earlier, the workbook will go into even greater detail with every single point that was made, and we'll be providing lists and questions for you to think about so that you can be developing more detailed nations. But hopefully this video gave you a good overview and helps you to get started at least. But yeah, that's all that I have for you today. This ends the series, so I'm not even sure what else to say at this point because we're done! We're done. Hopefully at this point you have developed a wide variety of interesting and unique cultures, and that most importantly you understand your world better and can thus develop your characters and your story even better. If you liked this video, if you loved the series, be sure to give this video especially a big thumbs up, and again consider subscribing on the way out to find more amazing videos on fantasy, series, and world building, because they will be coming at you very soon. All the information you need to know about me, my books that are coming out next year, and pretty much everything is in the description box below. And if you want to get that workbook, again, either follow me on Instagram or sign up for my newsletter, or both. Yeah, we're done. I'm going to go and take a rest now because that was a lot of material to go through. At some point, I do want to sit down and do a series, or maybe just one video, because a series is kind of like a long thing, but I do like shorter videos too. You guys let me know in the comments below, would you rather have a series of videos or one single video on me going through these steps and actually building a world for one of my series? I really want to do that as kind of, I really want to do that because I, again, learn easiest by watching other people do things, and sometimes just having a workbook and having to sit down and do it all yourself can be very uninspiring. So let me know, again, in the comments if you want to see me do one single giant video where I go through it, or if you'd rather have me do a series, or if even we want to do like a live world building write-in session where I'm sitting down with the materials and I'm going through it with you, and we're all kind of maybe I'll do that in October for Preptober as we all prepare for Nano. Maybe I'll do that. Yeah, put your comments down below. Let me know what you think. I hope you all have an amazing rest of the weekend writing, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!